Oh gosh. I hate July. I hate fireworks. I hate it. I hate everything. Storm, no. Pounce, no. Pounce. Pounce. My cat just saw my jumping spider. No, it's not for you. Also, my husband's streaming in the other room, so you're probably going to be hearing him laughing in the background. I apologize for that. Hi, editing Brina here. I'm just going to go ahead and point out that the corner of my lipstick is smeared throughout the entirety of this video. I see it. I'm aware of it. I wasn't aware of it then. It is what it is. Okay, back to the video. Hi, and welcome back to my channel. Or if you're new here, hello, welcome. Don't forget to like and hit that subscribe button if you so choose. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about something I briefly discussed in a TikTok video I made recently regarding the narrative of I should have been aborted, or I wish I was aborted, or if I had a choice I would have been aborted. Just kind of those different variations of that talking point. So I believe I was looking up articles from people who are saying that they wish they would have been aborted or they should have been aborted. But instead, I got articles pushing back against that narrative. And one of the first articles that I saw was titled, "How much do you have to hate yourself to wish your mother aborted you?" Obviously, that caught my eye, and I was immediately like, okay, we're going to talk about this. This article is actually coming from the perspective of somebody that is pro-choice, which I found kind of surprising, but I guess not all that much, because there are a lot of pro-choice advocates who get a little bit lost in how to talk about being pro-choice. And what I mean by that is the language they use is like almost catering to the pro-life movement, and I think can like harm our position as being pro-choice advocates or even pro-abortion advocates, which is something that also a lot of pro-choicers push back on, this idea that I am not pro-abortion, I'm just pro-choice. There's a video that a TikToker actually did that I thought was really informative about this.
So in my life, I was always pro-abortion. However, politically, the language that I grew up with was around being pro-life. However, one of the reasons that we're dealing with the consequences of not being pro-abortion and celebrating access to abortion specifically is because in 1973, when Roe v. Wade was decided upon by the Supreme Court, more conservative Christians ended up taking it upon themselves to have the pro-life movement be something that gave them the moral high ground. This is after they were refusing to desegregate schools in many ways, and after the Brown versus Board of Education decision by the Supreme Court, they lost that moral high ground. So they branded themselves as pro-life, and Democrats kind of validated that by not saying abortion.
So that video is by Nadia Okamoto. Go check out their videos if you wish, and go give that video a like. I'll make sure the link is in the description. Here's a quote also from an article that was written in 2016 titled "Why I Am Pro-Abortion, Not Just Pro-Choice." Valerie says, "I am pro-abortion like I am pro-knee replacement and pro-chemotherapy and pro-cataract surgery. As the last protection against ill-conceived childbearing when all else fails, abortion is part of a set of tools that help people form the families of their choosing. I believe that abortion care is a positive social good, and I suspect that a lot of other people secretly believe the same thing, and I think it is time that we said so." I will also link that article down in the description. Just be aware that some of the articles, even if they are pro-choice or pro-abortion, not all of them are catering to inclusive language. So if that's something that's triggering for you, I would keep that in mind. I just wanted to briefly talk about that a little bit, sort of as an intro as to why I think there are definitely a lot of flaws for people that want to be pro-choice advocates, but are misguided in how to go about it, probably because they are so used to responding and reacting to the language that the pro-life movement uses, or more better referred to as pro-birth extremists use. And I think because so many people are in this habit of reacting to those arguments, there's a lot of sugar-coated language and trying to sort of appease the other side versus making your own arguments and declarations that stand by themselves. And I think this article that we're going to be talking about here is a pretty good example of that. Before I get into that, I am going to play the TikTok video that I made a few days ago.
Again, this is about my experience and how I feel, so don't necessarily project that onto everybody else. Listen to what they are saying, particularly BIPOC people. But for me, even though I've survived to be where I am today, and I have a very loving relationship and marriage, and I'm so grateful that and lucky that I get to be where I'm at. However, in a hypothetical scenario where
I had my consciousness and I knew that I would have to relive my childhood and go through that trauma again, I would 100% choose to not be born.
So I go on to say in that video that that does not mean that I don't appreciate my life and where I am today, because I have lived my life, because I am here, because I exist. And I also owe it to the people that I love and the people that love me to stay and fight for them. And I've fought really hard to be here. For reference, I also made a couple of tweets regarding that TikTok video. I state again that if given the choice, I would have chosen not to be born. And I know I'm not the only child abuse survivor who feels this way. Unfortunately, many will not hear this because listening to what we have to say requires them to acknowledge the uncomfortable reality and horrific acts of abuse their own loved ones are capable of doing to their children, cousins, nieces, and nephews, etc. The truth is the very ones who loved us turned a blind eye to abuse in our own homes because knowing what their mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters have done is unbearable. And knowing what they themselves might be guilty of terrifies them because it means admitting that they did absolutely nothing to stop it. Sadly, ignoring the abuse that takes place under their own roof is the rule, not the exception. I go on to say none of this will change or get better until accountability is demanded, not just from our abusers, but from those who stayed silent in the face of it. And what I mean by that is, because I don't want to be misconstrued here, I'm not saying that there must be legal accountability in every case. I can't speak for everyone or specific circumstances surrounding that when it comes to people who willfully ignored abuse or knew exactly what was going on and ignored it. In most cases, especially if they're not in the household, they have suspicions, they have concerns, they see the red flags, but they don't know for certain what's going on, and they never bother to dig deeper into the situation because they're scared of what it means and they can't deal with it. So they kind of abandon us and leave us to deal with it on our own as the survivors of the abuse. So when I'm talking about accountability for those people, I mean being able to look yourself in the mirror and recognize what you could have done better or how you could still do better and be able to have those really difficult conversations, because where society is right now, it's the rule, not the exception, that these kind of things get brushed under the rug and hidden for years, and people may protect the abuser without even really knowing the full extent of how deep their abuse goes or understanding that it is in fact abuse. So that's kind of what I mean when I'm talking about accountability for those people. I go on to say that abortion not only saves lives, it can also put an end to generational trauma and prevent future victims of child abuse from being born into families that do not have the capabilities, support systems, or resources to end that cycle of trauma. Forced birth only ensures that there will be no end in sight to child abuse, and many of those kids pro-birthers think they are saving will instead be condemned to needless suffering until the end of their days. So now that we know what I have said about my stance on this issue, let's take a look at this article or blog post. I'm not really sure what it is. It's not like it was a super popular blog post. It was posted back in 2012. It has 57 comments. It was just something that happened to catch my eye because it was like one of the first things that popped up. They appear to be responding to an article that someone at The Guardian wrote by the name of Lynn Beisner. This person is claiming that it was a response to the "I survived an abortion" stories that people see from those whose parent was considering having abortion but then changed their mind. This person goes on to say that they sympathize with the difficult circumstances in their life, but in response, they want to point out that there are plenty of people who led similarly difficult lives and worse, and came out of them without the same sense of what I can only describe as self-loathing and guilt that Beisner appears to demonstrate in this essay. Sorry, I don't know. I found that a little bit triggering. I am really against this whole, I hate it when people pull this like comparative thing when it comes to difficult circumstances. Someone else's life being shittier than yours doesn't make your situation any less shitty. You know, everybody has their own struggles that they are going through, and comparing yourself to others is not going to help anyone get the help that they need ever, because there is always somebody that's had it worse, okay? Like that's always going to be the case. It doesn't help to push that narrative. It doesn't help anybody. So I automatically have an issue with that. But also, who is this person to say that there are plenty of people that have had it worse and they don't choose this? Like, you're not taking into account why some people wouldn't. Oh gosh. I hate July. I hate fireworks. I hate it. I hate everything. Okay. you're not taking into account like why this narrative is so radical. There are people who might agree with this sentiment if they actually understood the points that are being made. But because people get so shocked by it, and because, to be honest, there's a lot of conflation when it comes to understanding dying versus never being born, that people are afraid to sort of have these conversations. And like I said in the tweets I made, there's privilege, to be honest, and a lack of like true empathy when it comes to the struggles of others. And I haven't read this original article by Beisner, so I don't know what their situation was. But speaking for myself as a child abuse survivor, I feel like that's what I see a lot of, including other survivors, sort of minimizing what other survivors are going through because they think they had it worse. And it's just so incredibly toxic and invalidating and triggering for a lot of people involved in those situations or who have those types of experiences. And like I said earlier, it doesn't help anybody. And it's really not anyone's place to police how somebody reacts or deals with their trauma, because you haven't actually gone through their trauma. You've gone through your trauma. You haven't experienced their trauma. So it's not your place to say how you would react to it because it's not your experience. I understand that everyone, wants to have an opinion on everything, and I get that. This is not really a place for that. You can talk about situations without forcing yourself in a position that you're not a part of, because there's there's such a huge lack of empathy there when you are hypothetically putting yourself in the shoes of another abuse survivor or an abuse survivor in general, if you're not a survivor yourself, and saying this is what I would have done, because you don't know that and it's not your place to speak on it. So many survivors of abuse and child abuse particularly, they have spent years being gaslit and invalidated and just not listened to repeatedly. So having these types of reactions, it's just like a continuation of that abuse almost. That's what it feels like. It feels like you're back in that position, speaking for myself, where you're like a little kid and nobody's fucking listening to you. It's pretty common if you struggle with mental health issues or mental illness like depression that you're going to be combating self-loathing, okay? But merely talking about how you should have been aborted isn't innately self-loathing. I can't speak for Beisner, but it's not innately self-loathing. To reiterate, my perspective on it is thinking that if I knew what I was going to go through as a child, and I knew that I would have to experience those things, I would never choose to experience it again. It does not mean that I don't appreciate my life and that I am not going to fight to be here now. That means I do not consent to being psychologically and physically tortured in the way that I was as a child. They did put a couple of snippets of the article that Beisner wrote here. So I just want to also say that Beisner does say here that even if you discount science and believe I had consciousness and could have experienced pain at 6 gestational weeks, I would choose the brief pain or fear of an abortion over the decades of suffering that I endured. I don't know the specifics of that suffering, but that is what Beisner says. And that is what this person is responding to. This person also goes on just to talk about how they just find the whole thing pretty disturbing, of course. And they continue by saying that they support the right of people to have access to abortion, at least up to a point, but they are aghast that someone with a column in The Guardian, no less, would actually say that they wish their mother had aborted them. They end this blog post by saying, is this woman so disconnected from reality that she cannot see that, or she cannot see the inherent value of her own life, or am I missing something? Again, saying that you should have been aborted does not mean that you don't see value in your life. I've already explained why that is. If you guys need more clarification on that, feel free to ask questions in the comments. Just make sure that you're being respectful in doing so. Before we move on to responding to one of the other articles I want to talk about, which I think is from a pro-birth extremist, I also want to share a quote that I think of a lot. It's actually from BBC's series Sherlock. Taking your own life. Interesting expression. Taking it from who? Once it's over, it's not you who will miss it. Your own death is something that happens to everyone else. Your life is not your own. Keep your hands off of it. And I'm sharing that quote here because I feel like it really captures what I mean when I say that there's a difference between dying and never being born. Because once you have a foothold in this world, the impact that your death would have is much greater than the impact of not being born at all. It affects everyone else not just you. And also, having a right to personhood is intrinsically valuable because you were born, because you exist, because you're a sentient, conscious being that deserves to be protected and cared for by those that have agreed to protect you. Having a child up to the point of birth and taking on the obligations of parenthood, assuming you didn't give that child up for adoption, means that you are legally obligated to provide that child with a safe, nurturing home. You are consenting to being a parent, and we have a legal means to illustrate what all of that entails, although obviously there are flaws there. So, moving on to the next article we'll be talking about today. I actually remember finding this one, and this one came up when I was trying to see if there was any research or statistics on child abuse involving children that were unwanted, essentially. But of course, I first came across an article that basically says that abortion is a form of child abuse. So let's take a look at that here real quick. They say here that the irony in pro-abortionists claiming that abortion will decrease child abuse is glaringly obvious. After all, abortion itself is the greatest child abuse. The greatest child abuse. Yeah, okay. I find that pretty fucking offensive, to be honest, because it's really insensitive and just disconnected from the horrors that child abuse entails, the severe trauma that we go through and experience, and those that have actually lost their lives to being abused to death. Saying that abortion, never being born, is the greatest child abuse is just so far disconnected from that fact. I find it greatly offensive and insulting. Not that that's an argument in itself. I'm just speaking from the perspective of an abuse survivor, why that statement is very troubling to me. They also say that pro-aborts, okay, interesting word. This is also a good example of how the pro-life movement uses like pro-abortion against us, and we honestly need to stop being so afraid of the word, because it's clearly meant to be like an insult to call us pro-abortionists or pro-aborts instead of pro-choicers, but we shouldn't be afraid of that. We shouldn't be giving them the power to try to even weaponize that against us. But anyways, they say here that we insist that abortion is a good thing for society because it will simply eliminate any children that might at some point in the future suffer at the hands of abusive adults. First off, if that is the point being made, and let's just say it is for the sake of argument, that's obviously not true. There are plenty of wanted children that are abused, partially because they're wanted for the wrong reason, but also partially because of the narrative surrounding abortion to begin with, right? For example, in my case, I was told, I don't know how true this is because I wasn't there, but I was told that my mother weaponized getting an abortion against my father in order to, I think, force him into a relationship that he didn't want to be in, or try to make him stay in the relationship. Like, if you don't stay with me, I'm going to have an abortion. Those types of narratives are popularized because of the negative connotation surrounding abortion to begin with. Most of those narratives being pushed by the religious right. People that are raised in those environments and surrounded by people that have those types of ideologies and this type of perception of abortion being that it's murder, it makes it so people that probably shouldn't be parents never really have an opportunity to question that for themselves, because they are under the false perception that it is murder. And that's a part of the problem, and that's why these conversations are important. Because yes, plenty of abused children are wanted, but why are they wanted? And how is society contributing to the hysteria surrounding the idea of getting abortion in the first place? That said, I will say that it is my belief that forcing people to give birth will result in an increase of child abuse, much of which will never ever see legal consequences. That's just a fact. A lot of survivors, myself included, don't ever get legal repercussions for their abuse. And I think this is particularly true when you're a child, because you can't advocate for yourself. And by the time you come to terms with what happened, either too much time has passed, or it would be far too traumatic at that point to even attempt to do anything, if it's even possible. So like, the statistics are very skewed in that sense. But also there is research behind this that demonstrates this, and I will put those links down in the description box as well. I think they'll be at the very end, so be sure to check that out if you're interested. But I am not just pulling this out of my ass. There are studies that have been done, and studies that are probably going to be done in the future, that very likely support this narrative. I will also put a link to an article that talks about the spouses and partners of domestic abusers and how forced birth enables their abusers, and also forces people to bring children into abusive homes by not giving them the option to have an abortion. The last article that we're going to look at today is a blog post, and it is titled "What to Say to Someone Who Says, I Wish I Had Been Aborted." I don't remember what I read in this article that made me want to react to it, so let's go through this together. This person, Josh, says they got a tough question from a reader this week. The question was, what should I say to someone who tells me that they wish they had been aborted? I hear this a lot from people who had bad childhoods. Oh boy. Ugh, I already feel my whole body cringing. Josh says, I would probably start by saying this. That makes me sad you would say that. It tells me you must have lived a very sad life. I don't know. That's a weird phrasing. I haven't even finished reading what he says, but as someone who's done some volunteer work for a helpline before, it's not validating and it's not really going to be helpful for the other person to hear you make it about yourself. You know, if you're a child abuse survivor, that's pretty much what you've had to struggle with your entire life, carrying the guilt and the sadness of your abusers because they feel bad for what they did, the guilt and the sadness of everyone else who is upset to hear about what you went through or doesn't want to hear it at all. Like, you should not be responding with like how you're feeling about that, if that makes sense. Like, that's not really the time to talk about what you're feeling because it's not about you. It's always better, I think, to try to start with something more like, I'm really grateful that you felt safe enough to open up to me to tell me that. Thank you for sharing that. And then maybe ask, do you want to talk about it more? Or if you want to talk about it more, I'm here to listen, if that is the case. Also continuing it by saying you must have lived a very sad life. I guess from this perspective, they might have thought that this was validating, but it feels patronizing to me. But they do end it with here, I'd be open to hearing more about that if you'd like to share with me. I think that part's good. The beginning part's not good. Josh also mentions a friend on Facebook that responded with, find out why they feel that way. So why they wish they had been aborted. Listen to their story. Okay, good so far. Find common ground with the difficult circumstances that may have been experienced, be it poverty or abuse or growing up without a dad. That's not really a good idea, in my opinion. Like, there's a way to share your experiences and relate to one another, but you should really be very careful in the language you're using while sharing your experiences to make sure that you're not speaking over their experiences and saying, well, I went through this and I don't wish that I was aborted, or so-and-so went through this and they don't say that they wish they were aborted. Okay, but you didn't live their experience and their life. Problem with this article as a whole is it does seem to me to be coming from the perspective of, how do we debate people that say this? Although, to be fair, Josh does say here that they are not taking the bait that's okay. I said to be fair, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But they're not taking the bait to debate abortion on this point, but instead, leaning more towards a relational response. So I guess in their mind, like a more human, empathetic response. But also referring to this talking point as bait to debate abortion really disregards the lived experiences of abuse survivors. And even though I assume that's not something that Josh would say if they were actually having this conversation, he is making a point to say it in this blog post, which is like an indicator of what Josh is really thinking, regardless of what actually comes out of his mouth during a conversation like this, should he ever have one. Josh also says, I might also recommend professional counseling, although they do clarify that while this statement doesn't necessarily mean a person is suicidal, it's a fair guess that he is probably very sad. It's not really true. Again, you can make the statement that I should have been aborted and not be living a sad life. That's like a sense of pitying that honestly survivors we don't need that. You can validate and recognize our struggles in the aftermath of surviving abuse without pitying us to a point where you're like devaluing our own lives, which I know is going to seem ironic to pro-birthers because they think saying that I should have been aborted means that I must not value my own life. Again, that is not the case because I'm here and it is my life. The act of a fertilized egg implanting itself in somebody's uterus is not distinctive of a right to life that exceeds that of the host. A really good video I also watched recently talks about the point of why people say that the process of pregnancy is parasitic and how it goes so much farther than that because it literally mirrors what parasites do when they are in the body. How the embryo will trick the host into not identifying it as a foreign body and expelling it. I'll go ahead and share that video with you guys actually. This is coming from Kendall with 2 L's Lincoln on TikTok. I'll also go ahead and link that video down in the description box.
When scientists say that a fetus is a parasite, that's not them being an asshole, that's them being accurate. It's not just the fact that the fetus takes nutrients at the expense of the host that makes it a parasite, it's the process by which this happens that makes it extremely parasitic. This is what the embryo will look like as it's going down the fallopian tubes. You'll notice that there is a dark magenta ring in this diagram. The ring represents the protective membrane because without it, the host will rightfully recognize it as a foreign body and try to expel it. That means kill it, by the way. Second, you'll notice that when the embryo becomes what's called a blastocyst, there's a ring of cells and then an empty space in the middle. Those are trophoblast cells, which will become the placenta. So no, it's not your placenta, it's the placenta the fetus makes and plugs into your body without you knowing, but I digress. It's only after the fetus implants the placenta into your uterine lining that your body gets tricked into thinking it's not a foreign body anymore. This is done by the fetus in a number of ways, but I'm going to mention 3. Placenta will secrete neurokinin B, which often has phosphocholine molecule. Phosphocoline's job is to prevent the host from knowing that there is a foreign body inside. This is the exact mechanism used by parasitic nematodes, so their host doesn't know that it's there either. Second thing the placenta will do is secrete a molecule called beta-HCG. This is what stops your period. Not your body realizes it's pregnant and it stops menstruating. No, the fetus stops you from menstruating. It forces you into that. Last example I'll bring up is the fetus will have lymphocytic suppressor cells, and those inhibit the host cytotoxic T cells, which is just your basic immune response. It kills whatever is foreign. So to sum that up, it needs to protect itself from the host, trick the host into not killing it, and stop the host's normal bodily functioning. And then from there, it starts seeping nutrients and pumping waste into the host. And that is why consent from the host is so important here. The reason people say your body, your choice, and it doesn't apply to the fetus is because the first thing the fetus does is invade. The fetus is the aggressor here. Abortion isn't the first action. The invasion of the uterus is the first action. Why terminating the pregnancy isn't murder.
Again, I will put the link to that video in the description. Go ahead and go share that creator some support and like the video if you so choose. Continuing back to this blog post, Josh puts in bold letters that it's one thing for someone to wish they had been aborted. It's another thing to assume everybody would wish the same thing later in life. I don't know that that's really relevant because I don't think anybody is saying that. People are speaking about their experiences and why they feel the way they feel. But in terms of abortion itself, it's not necessarily made to demonstrate that abortion is a human rights issue. I think this point brings more attention to the prominent issue that is child abuse and the trauma that it inflicts on survivors, while also contributing to conversations surrounding abortion itself, the narrative surrounding abortion and parenthood. So saying that some survivors say that they should have been aborted where some survivors don't, that's not really like a talking point that means that we should be pro-choice or pro-abortion versus pro-birth. I think the conversation's a lot more important in terms of child abuse than it is in terms of the abortion debate. Josh also asks here, do you think we should assume that everybody will have such a sad life they would regret being born? No, that's silly. And that's not what people are saying. People opening up about these stories is honestly more for the purpose of being listened to and being heard, and having their childhood traumas recognized as the horrific acts that they are. It's them speaking for themselves, not over anyone else's experience. I'm exhausted with this video at this point, but Josh also put some responses that he thinks would be good for someone to say to someone else who is saying that they should have been aborted or they wish they had been aborted. Josh says, I'm really glad your mother didn't abort you. I'm glad she chose life and that we're able to have this conversation today. No, not a good response. And the reason I say that is because Josh was just talking about the people that are saying this have traumas in their life. He knows it's very likely that one of the parents contributed to that trauma and abuse. So saying that you're glad that the mother did anything could be extremely triggering for them. It very well could even trigger a trauma response. You're possibly saying that you're thankful to their abuser, and that's going to be very upsetting for a child abuse survivor to hear, should that be the case. In this next response, Josh suggests saying, I'm glad you're here because you have inherent dignity and worth that not even you can take away. That feels way more combative than necessary. It almost portrays them as an aggressor, like not even you can take that away. Them feeling like they should have been aborted, or they would have rather been aborted than go through what they went through in their childhood, is their fault. Their response, their reaction to that is their fault. When in reality, it was a situation that was out of their control, and they are not responsible for how they internally feel about the traumas that they went through and the things that they carry with them. It comes off to me as a lot of blaming and shaming rhetoric that is uncalled for. Josh also says here, your life is valuable and deserves to be respected, even if you don't believe that. See, I have like a completely different like understanding of this, because I think saying that you would have rather not been born than go through what you went through means that you do recognize the value of your life and the respect and the treatment that you deserved. Again, saying that you should have been aborted is not the same thing as wishing that you were dead. Recognizing that what you went through was horrible and undeserved, and that you would never willingly put yourself through that again if you had the choice. To me, that is recognizing the value of your life and your personhood, and could be an important, building block when it comes to recovering from these sort of traumas in your life. It could likely mean that you're in a spot where you have moved away from a lot of the misplaced guilt and shame that most, if not all, survivors carry deeply within them at some point in their lives throughout the abuse that they endured and the aftermath of it for the decades to come. It's a battle that's never really won. It just gets easier to fight on a daily basis the more that you grow and heal as a survivor. That is it for this heavy video. Feel free to leave your own thoughts in the comment section. Just be sure to check out the rules and guidelines in the description box for what is okay and what is not acceptable. You are more than welcome to share personal experiences. I know not everyone is going to think to put a trigger warning for those things, so consider this the trigger warning. As I stated at the top of the description box, the comments are going to be regulated for this video because of how sensitive the topic is. And with all that said, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will catch you in the next one. Shout out to my top patron, Queen of Beams, my Rice Crisp snack, Birdie, and my mod mates, Laur A and Sarah Z. Pounce. It's not for you. Oh gosh, now he's looking at my tarantulas. Please stop. Please stop.